On this episode of the Curmudgeon Rock Report, you'll hear us tell you all about September of 1985. That may seem like an odd exercise, but we think you'll be just as fascinated as we are by everything that occurred during that extraordinary set of weeks. Frank Zappa scolded Tipper Gore. We wanted our MTV. Indie power pop hit the major labels. Farmers found a forever friend in Willie Nelson. And yep, we also built this city on rock and roll. Oh, what a month. So put on your flamingo pink and whip out all the hairspray and join us in this look back machine.
Welcome, everyone, to the 21st edition of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. This is Arturo Andrade coming to you from Gwangju, South Korea. And with me, as always, is Chris O'Connor from Houston, Texas. Actually, an hour outside of Houston, but doesn't matter.
Hey, you're about 2 hours outside of Seoul, so what the hell, you know?
4 hours, actually.
Oh, 4 hours. Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, folks, this is, and more specifically, rock music geek folks. This is your podcast made by rock geek iconoclastic outsiders for rock geek iconoclastic outsiders such as yourselves. And hey, there's a good chance you'll learn some stuff you never knew before. Right,
Okay.
Chris?
No, absolutely. We are fonts of knowledge, or at least we think we are. Sometimes, you are the oracle of facts. I am the oracle of musing, which means sometimes Prince ends up as the guitarist for Blind Melon. We understand that, but that's what makes us so endearing. And, we are serious folks. Arturo is one of the great digging in the crates. I think you're a little bit beyond amateur. I think you're a curator. You're a curator's curator.
I should be making money from this shit.
No fooling. And once upon a time, I did make money from this stuff. I'll always say it. I was a lucky dude. I kind of talked my way into it, but I learned an awful lot, and here I am. I became an encyclopedia too, although I will admit this: about 30% of what I know, and maybe that's a modest underestimate, comes from my associations with Mr. Andrade. So that's all to say. We're here to be reverent. We're here to teach. We're here to inform. What the fuck? Let's have some fun.
Let's be reverent and irreverent.
Yes, irreverent. Yes,
Yeah.
Exactly. Picture an ear. Be irreverent.
Ha 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 ha.
See how that goes?
Yeah, got it. All right. Well, as some of you heard as you all heard in the teaser, we'll be talking about one specific month in the history of rock music, September of 1985, when Chris and I were wee little curmudgeons going into fifth grade, and a whole lot of shit happened that actually kind of altered the decade of the 80s and for the rest of the decade.
Yeah, and actually beyond. I mean, it's surprising that rock and roll, I mean, is a study in moments. Think about like the Summer of Love, which actually was a thing, or like Altamont, which was one day, which actually changed some trajectory. But first, you can hear that sound, folks. It's mysterious. It's wondrous. It's something straight out of an Ed Wood film. We are coming now into the parallel universe where green may be blue and up may be down, but the rock and roll that you and I love and know is the stuff of grandeur is still on the big stages, is still the subject of conversations, and it's not relegated to the third or fourth story or the back of the book. It's actually on the cover. Move over, Olivia Rodrigo and Future, and make room for some of the artists that we'll talk about today and their new albums. As usual, Arturo, you go first. Who are you vibing on in the parallel universe this week?
Yes, I'm vibing on the most recent album by Philadelphia folk rock singer songwriter Steve Gunn, and his latest album called Other You. Other You. Um, Now, Gunn, this guy's been around for more than a decade. And like I said just a few seconds ago, he comes from the same laid back, classic rock loving Philadelphia scene that gave us Kurt Weill and the War on Drugs. And for a little while in the early teens, last decade, he was actually a guitarist in Kurt Weill's band, the Violators. Now, while the War on Drugs classic rock touchstones are Bruce Springsteen and Tom Petty, and Kurt Weill's are Lou Reed and Tom Petty. Notice Tom Petty's there twice.
Yeah, exactly, as he should be.
Yeah. Gunn's brand of slightly psychedelic folk rock has a very distinctly Grateful Deadish vibe. And when I make the comparisons to the Dead, I don't mean it in the Fish way. Take a song and make it into a sprawling 20-minute jam. Gunn is more influenced by the concise, focused, structured song style of the Dead. He's more American Beauty than Anthem of the Sun. And yes, for all you jam band haters out there, the Grateful Dead were actually really good songwriters who could write short, economic, tight pop songs. They just chose not to do so most of the time.
Yeah, they were about half and half. I mean, like Blues for Allah is like one of those something for everybody records, which is why I love it.
Yeah.
So it's like short and long. But anyway, let us digress. Yes,
Yes.
there is a lot of Working Man's Dead to be found in the Steve Gunn aura.
Yeah, in all his albums, really. And here's
Correct.
the thing, though. Gunn has more in his arsenal. Get it? Steve
Yes.
Gunn, Arsenal. Haha.
Boom, boom, boom.
He had the Dead influence, of course. But in interviews, he's admitted to being a huge fan of like all those old-time folk guitar virtuosos like John Fahey and Robbie Basho. And he's a lover of classical Indian music. And you can kind of hear it in some of his albums. It all coalesces into this unique kind of a deceptively complex folk-driven rock that doesn't really replicate his influences, unlike a lot of others out there. When he started out, he was known more for his trippy, slinky, liquid-like guitar sound. However, in recent years, he's really come into his own as a songwriter. 2014's Way Out Weather is, in my opinion, a modern day classic and an excellent example of great musicianship and great songwriting peaking at the same time, which you really don't get that often. 2016's Eyes on the Lines rocked and grooved more than he ever had before. It's another great album. And his most recent album, before this one, the 2019 album, the Unseen in Between. It's got some great stuff on it too. As for his new album, Other You, Gunn mellows out a bit. He gets a little more laid back, gets introspective, and comes up with an album, in my opinion, of pure shimmering beauty. That patented slinky, liquidy guitar sound is still there, but this time it provides a cushion for, if not his best set of songs, certainly the prettiest music he's ever made. Songs like Circuit Rider, Protection, and On the Way, they never feel rushed, yet they have this subtle propulsion to them, highlighted by his, these really subliminally catchy, not overtly catchy, loping melodies and increasingly psychedelicized, abstractly philosophical lyrics. Gunn has gotten to the point where you don't really care about his lyrics anymore. You just want to hear his voice sing something and get lost in the music. That's pretty much what Gunn is at this point. So if you're into immaculately crafted songs with understatedly great guitar playing and like a woozy, trippy, laid back folk rock groove that stops just short of entering cliche hippie territory, Steve Gunn is your jam.
Yeah, and he's not quite mine, only in the sense that there's it's pretty, it's gentle, and yeah, there's a lot of stuff going on there, and he's obviously a gifted musician, and the melody choices are obviously deliberate.
Yeah.
You can tell if he wanted to be Cole Porter, he probably could.
Yeah.
But to me, look, it's only been a couple of listens, and so talk to me in 2 months if I really get back to it. I'm not really inspired to right now, but it just bores me. It's a lovely bore. I will say this: I do like the song "Good Wind." The guy writes a really nice, like you said, a trippy waltz. It is
Yeah.
definitely a trippy waltz, and the lyrics are there, and there he's got a kind of there's a mystique to his voice. So yeah, I'll say he's an original. He's just like not really, and you'd be surprised because I've been into some guys in this vein. He's not really my cup of tea. And it's interesting, like him and Kurt Vile in the same band. I don't necessarily picture that. I mean, and then also, if you like connect them to Granzuziel from the War on Drugs, it's like three things that do they really go together? I guess Philly had diversity and an appreciation for each other's talents, I suppose. But anyway, yeah. I mean, look, Steve Gunn is worth the investigation, but meh.
Well, speaking of folk, folk music, another artist heavily influenced by folk and country, for that matter.
Yeah.
I consider her more of a country artist. But anyway, go ahead, Chris.
Yeah, I think of her as one of the best songwriters in America and just a wonderful voice. So let me set this up. Now, she should be huge. Alas, she's only sort of a big deal. Mainly contained to rock charts and some gimmicky mainstream love for forming the Highwomen, which is a country singer-songwriter supergroup thingy with a few other sort of well-known songwriter songstresses that indie folks like in places like Austin dig. And look, she did get 6 Grammy nominations in 2018, kind of like a participation trophy. So she's been around for 15 years, critically lauded, and again, she's sold some records. She went gold with 2007's The Story, which is her best record. So now here we are in 2021. Like I said, she should be huge. She should be as big a star as there is in a country because she is a star. I mean, she just explodes out of the speakers. She's charismatic as hell. Really, really great artist. So, a few things to set this up and talk about this new record. Now, perhaps her most famous song, 2007's "The Story," she sings in that song, "All of these lines across my face tell you the story of who I am. So many stories of where I've been and how I got to where I am." She was 26 at the time. That's pretty profound stuff and wisely romantic way beyond her years. Well, now, here she is at 40. And Carlyle, like I said, not exactly a well-kept secret anymore, is at her most confident and effortless on this new album, again called "In These Silent Days." She'll never fully abandon her country western leanings, but here she reminds me of Paul Simon, Carole King, and John Prine. These are the kinds of songwriters and artists that never made it sound difficult.
Yeah.
The right words fit the right melodies, and the right melodies fit the right arrangements consistently. You don't really picture anybody playing. It's just this sort of, it hits you, and it's just a really impressive, hypnotic listen. Now, this is not to say this is her best album. That is still 2007's "The Story." And while the empathy and graceful maturity, joy, and hope that emerge as major themes never relent, this album itself runs out of gas about 2/3 of the way through, and the remaining songs amble and groan towards the finish a little too much. Until then, though, Carlyle is the rock and roll Wonder Woman, at least in the maturity bracket. Now, Amy Taylor of Amel and the Sniffers is the commander of the Brats. Carlyle doesn't overly rumble as much as she did a decade ago, nor does she pine like a breathy chanteuse. But this album is just an engrossing listen from a woman who knows who she is and is romantic as ever. These are probably my favorite lyrics by anyone this year from the song Letter to the Past. You're a stone wall in a world full of rubber bands. You're a pillar of belief still fighting your empty hands. Folks are going to lean on you and leave when the cracks appear. But darling, I'll be here. I'll be the last. You're my letter to the past. Chances are I may sing that to my wife once or twice.
Oh,
Yeah, I am that sweetly romantic, but that is wonderful. And then there's this close runner-up from the song "You and Me on the Rock," which is just a wonderful pop, basically a perfect pop song where she sings, "I build a house up on this rock, baby, every day with you. There's nothing in that town I need. After everything we've been through, me out in my garden and you out on your walk is all the distance this old girl can take. Without listening to you talk, I don't need their money, baby. Just you and me on the rock." Powerful, lovely, beautiful stuff from a powerful artist with powerful pipes full of conviction, which may coincidentally, explain why she's a serious contender to front a reformed Soundgarden. Again, I'm not kidding. Look this up. All hail Brandy Carlyle. So that's my thoughts.
Yeah, my thing about Brandy Carlyle, I mean, I consider her a country artist because most of what she does is really country music. Or that's the base of almost everything she does while she goes off into other areas. But one thing I do respect and admire about her is that country music in general has got a pretty conservative culture around it and within it. As beautifully detailed in Robert Altman's 1975 classic Nashville. A lot of the conservative ideology around country music still persists to this day. It just has shinier, prettier clothes and more upbeat stuff, but it's still conservative. And Brandy Carlyle is very open as a homosexual.
Yes.
Who's married to a woman, and she's never shied away from it. And I suspect that's probably one of the reasons why she's never crossed over to a mainstream country audience. Because of her out front sexuality.
Yeah, and personally, I kind of would think she doesn't give a shit.
Yeah, which is fine too. But she is talented, and she deserves to be heard by a wider mainstream country audience, not just the Sturgill Simpson crowd. All right, well that's a good mention. We went two serious. One is country, one is country influenced artists in our parallel, and they would seep right into one of the 10 topics, one of the 10 points of our main topic for this episode, and that is the singular month of September 1985. Shall I introduce this, Chris?
You shall.
I shall. All right. Now, why did we, and I know for you listeners out there, we tend to have top 10 lists of things involving rock, who's better, who's great, who's overrated, who's underrated, albums that suck, albums that aren't, blah, blah, blah. We're doing it a little different this time, and differently, I should say. And why are we doing it a little differently? Well, let's just say today's episode resulted from something of a happy accident. A little before September 11th, yours truly, Chris, reviewed September 11th, 2001 releases. The 20th anniversary of 9/11. And one of those albums that came up was Slayer's God Hates Us All. Great album title.
Yep.
Now, that Slayer, probably the only time you're ever going to hear Slayer on this podcast, triggered some memories in Chris of the battle over rock lyrics and warning labels, which started with the Pmrc hearings in Congress, in which John Denver, Dee Snider, Al Gore, and Frank Zappa officially became fodder for the same sentence, which they never would again after that. So, Senor Chris researched these hearings a bit and wondered, man, what else happened in the month of September 1985? As it turns out, a whole shitload.
Indeed.
MTV was king, of course, but a few important corners were turned, and a few monumental bombs were dropped into the rock and roll canon for better and definitely for worse. So, as you know, as you listeners know, one of the Curmudgeon Rock Report's purposes as your rock geek iconoclast leaders is to capture moments in time and keep them exciting, fresh, and informative and alive as well. iHeartRadio, which used to be Clear Channel, you will never kill our spirit of radio. Long live Rush.
Absolutely. R.I.P. Neil Peart. Yeah.
That said, oh, what a month, September 1985. It's something that we're doing for the first time. And saying that, welcome back in a time machine to September 1985, when your little curmudgeons were nothing more than little curmudgeons entering fifth grade in the entering pangs of puberty, and when everyone still wanted their MTV, and when even you, the listener, probably wore aqua blue.
Jonathan Givony, author of an excellent recent book on the band Pearl Jam, Not For You, Pearl Jam in the Present Tense, has a good line about the band's epic debut album, 1991's 10. Givony writes, "Is 10 a good album? It's almost beside the point, like asking if the Atlantic is a good ocean. 10 exists, and it always will, as long as people listen to bombastic rock, and that's all we need to say about that." That's an unpretentious, matter-of-fact observation in a book full of them. While Givony is a concert producer, music business guy, as well as a writer, he's also a fan, who, like your curmudgeons, leaned on Pearl Jam's music in high school and in college for inspiration and survival. Givony tells us he's seen the band at least 57 times. He uses all of that collective experience and intense personal connection to weave an in-the-moment narrative that we can't quite call a biography or a social history or a generational commentary. To borrow Givony's own line, that's almost beside the point. Not For You, Pearl Jam in the Present Tense, is its own thing, man. We strongly suggest you invest in these pages, whether through Amazon or, hey, even a local bookstore or record store.
So, Chris, you're a bit of a news hound. Tell us, aside from music or music-related things, what else happened in September 1985?
Yeah, really interesting month. So you had Pete Rose passing Ty Cobb as the all-time hits leader in baseball. Two of the biggest assholes in the history of sports in the same sentence. But that was a big deal for months leading up to that. You had the UK race riots that broke out in Birmingham and Brixton. And just like they did in the 70s, that was became good material for lots of British punk bands and sort of underground acts. Ronald Reagan finally got serious about South Africa and sanctioned them over apartheid. You had the Robert Bork hearings, for Supreme Court, and that launched the never-ending cycle of ideological cockblocking. You had the MLB cocaine quote-unquote scandal going on, and the drug dealers on trial. You had all the Tylenol cyanide shit going on, if you remember that, with all the tainted Tylenol. And then Howard Stern got himself fired from WNBC, which, depending on your perspective, was either the best thing or the worst thing to ever happen to radio. So just wanted to mention that.
It was definitely the best thing that ever happened to Howard Stern.
Well, yeah, no fooling, but also radio. I mean, look, the shock jock thing broke out really with him. So
yeah.
So that's really the backdrop. So this is very 80s, and obviously you had stuff like crack and homelessness and the Contras and all of that, but that was not endemic to September. All that stuff was. So with that said, let us launch into our musical exploration of September 1985. I think folks, you're going to be blown away that all of this shit happened within 3 or 4 weeks of each other.
Yeah, no shit. First item point. The Hot 100, the Billboard Hot 100 singles charts for September 28th, 1985, which happens to be my birthday. I turned
Yes.
10 years. I turned 10 years old on that day, and boy, what a lot of shit was on the charts at this time. Good God!
Oh, well,
I mean,
it depends on your perspective, but this is an indicative month. I mean, this was like a golden age for top 40 radio and stuff that sticks with us. Iconic stuff that still shows up in movies and commercials, and college freshmen singing stuff ironically in bars.
yeah,
So I'll read off this top 10, and then we'll talk about a little bit about why this one is particularly important for rock history. So this is kind of funny, but it's also kind of amazing. So this is the top 10 on September 28th, 1985. Number 1, Money for Nothing by Dire Straits. Two,
not a bad song. That's all right. I like
yeah,
that.
Cherished by Kool and the Gang. Yeah, a very much far step down from the 1974 Kool and the Gang.
Yeah,
when they were doing all that funky stuff with the horns.
yeah.
Freedom by Wham.
Ugh.
Yeah, which it's a fun song. And then Don't Lose My Number by Phil Collins.
Oh,
Terrible
God.
song with a fabulous, wonderful video, one of the best of all time. Oh Sheila by Ready for the World.
Oh, God.
Which is still to these days, that is a big time earworm. Then you have Dress You Up by Madonna, which is one of her more underrated pop songs. Man, that's just pure sugar. And then 7, Take On Me by Aha,
Ugh.
which will never die. Never, ever, ever die. That guy in the pencil black and white sketchings will always break through the mirror in our minds. Number 8, Selling Almost Fire, Man in Motion by John Parr. Stay tuned for that one. Number 9 was Saving All My Love for You by Whitney Houston.
Oh, wow.
And,
that song's from that year? Jeez.
Yes. And then number 10 was Lonely Old Night by John Mellencamp.
That's a good song. I like that.
Yes. Scarecrow, which is John Mellencamp's best album and arguably the best album in 1985, came out the month before in August. Now, the most important thing to note about this top 10, this is Whitney Houston's first foray into the top 10. This song had been, her album actually was released, if I'm not mistaken, in 1984.
Yeah, the album's from 84. Yeah, her first one.
And it just slow burning. Clive Davis still had the confidence in her. And this is when she finally reached, this week is when she finally reached the top 10, which means that Whitney Houston had arrived. And as we all know, between 1985 and 1993, Whitney Houston was the dominant artist on the pop charts.
Well, her and Madonna.
Yeah, I would say those two. I mean, they were neck and neck, but I think the cover of "I Will Always Love You" puts Whitney over the top.
Number 2. Now, in the summer of 1985, there was a wonderful event called Live Aid, which was every big name in rock and pop that you can think of doing these. It was at 3 different stadiums, I think. One in London's Wembley, one in Washington, D.C. I think there's another one somewhere else. I'm not sure.
No, actually, it was London and Philly.
Okay, those were the 2.
I'm fact-checking you. And Phil Collins played at both. Phil Collins played drums for Led Zeppelin. Egads.
Yeah, I know. Phil's everywhere. Ubiquitous Phil. Anyway, in one of those 2, Live Aid, which is a benefit to raise money for starving countries in Africa, right? In one of these Live Aids, particularly the July 13th one, not sure if it was Philly or London, Bob Dylan performed. And, he, of course, everyone knew this was about raising money for poor, starving families and children in certain African countries. And he made comments on stage while performing, between songs, of course. And Dylan doesn't usually, or never, and still doesn't usually do this. This is more Bruce Springsteen territory. But apparently, Bob Dylan felt the need to say something. And he made comments about family farmers in the United States in danger of losing their farms through mortgage debt, predatory banks, lending money that they know can never be paid. So this is their way of seizing property, right? Dirty motherfuckers that they are. But anyway, Dylan saying to the worldwide audience, exceeding 1 billion people, by the way, I'm going to do my best Bob voice. oh, I hope that some of the money, maybe they can just take a little bit of it, maybe 1 or 2 million, maybe and use it, say, to pay the mortgages on some of the farms and the farmers here that they owe to the banks. Apparently, this pissed Bob Geldof off, but it lit a light bulb over Willie Nelson's head, and he thought, you know what, Dylan's got a good idea. And then he, along with John Mellencamp and Neil Young, they formed Farm Aid. And they had the first Farm Aid, I believe, was in September 22nd in Champaign, Illinois, at the Memorial Stadium.
Yes, which it was in that wonderful cornfield bastion of Champaign, Illinois.
Well, it's a big college town, so the University of Illinois is.
Yeah, and I'm saying, I'm only goofing on that because you would have thought it would have been more in sort of a cow town, so one town over from the University of Illinois. But I will say this: so Live Aid was on July 13th, 1985. Farm Aid in Illinois was on September 22nd, 1985. So this gave them a little over 2 months to put together a bill. And they did a really pretty damn good job of it. Look, and it was kind of a weird cross section. Obviously, we said Neil Young, who was in the middle of promoting his worst album called Old Ways. I think by far his worst record. It's just basically a cynical country, down home, corn poke, straw hat kind of stuff. It's actually pretty insulting. But anyway, so who else was on this? Johnny and Edgar Winter, Foreigner, Sammy Hagar, who ostensibly we believe did not drive 55 on the stage, Don Henley, who, hey, anything that could be self-serious back in the 80s, Don Henley was probably there. Ry Cooder, hey, actually they got somebody pretty good. The Beach Boys, hey, Mike Love, shameless motherfucker. He's going to be there. The Charlie Daniels Band. Go find the footage of The Devil Went Down to Georgia from Farm Aid. That guy rocked. Say what you want. Say what you want about the politics of his son. You ever want to follow a horrible Twitter feed? A humorously horrible Twitter feed. His son runs a Twitter feed for the Charlie Daniels estate. John Denver was there. Hold on to that name. We'll come back to him in a little bit. And then others you would expect, Kenny Rogers, Johnny Cash, all of those folks, Chris Christopherson. So actual country people on an actual, kind of country designed show. One thing to note, so this was the beginning of the awareness of the plight of the family farmer. At the time, like you said, there was the predatory mortgage thing of trying to seize the land so that they could go big ag. And this was sort of the beginning of the factory farming outgrowth, which if you ever want to be scared, go see some of that footage, and you'll see what exactly is getting in your meat. Steroids and shit basically is getting in your food.
But they still taste good.
Oh yeah, I'll eat that McDonald's burger every day of the week. But here's the thing: back then it was predatory mortgaging. Now it's predatory patenting and licensing. Basically, Monsanto, with its GMO techniques, has basically cornered the market on seeds, which was a very essential part of the small business agribusiness world. Well, now these seed dealers can't do it, or they tried to do that. Monsanto came up with these GMO seeds, and they basically forced folks to buy these seeds. Either you get this price, or basically they played hardball, and they put all these seed dealers out of business. So in 36 years, it was a nightmare back then. Now it's a real nightmare, and it's one of the more nefarious things in the country. That Farm Aid is still held every year in different places.
And that's the thing I want to get to. I noticed, I'm looking at it, almost not every single year there was no Farm Aid in 91, and there was no Farm Aid in 1988. But from 1992 onward, there's been a Farm Aid every single year up until 2020, which of course, no, they didn't happen because of the coronavirus, but they did do it. They did do it virtually from people's homes. They did it through YouTube.
Yeah.
But anyway, the fact that since 1985 there's still a need for Farm Aid and they still do Farm Aid every single year.
Yeah, it's pretty damning.
That's pretty tells you how bad it is for farmers.
Oh yeah, I mean farmers. It's a tragedy. It's a bona fide tragedy. And look, Mellencamp and Nelson and whoever has taken up the mantle since then, God bless them for continuing to fight the good, almost impossible fight. But here we are. I mean, we haven't had another Live Aid, and look, hey. We just got a kind of sort of half-assed effective vaccine for malaria. So things have gotten better in Africa, so we don't need to worry about that. Farmers, no such luck.
Yeah. Next, less bad news and more for a comical perspective of September 1985. And this indeed was comical. The PMRC. What does PMRC stand for, Chris?
It is the Parents Music Resource Center.
Yeah. In other words, dumb soccer moms have nothing else better to do.
Well, hey, be careful there because two of the co-founders were Tipper Gore, Al Gore's wife, and Susan Baker, who was the wife of Jim Baker, otherwise known probably as the Grand Poobah of the Illuminati. The old Secretary of State under Bush. Yeah. So these were not dumb women in most aspects of their life, except rock and roll.
Yeah, exactly. And, they want to put warning stickers on. By now in 2021, putting warning stickers on an album sleeve, is not that big of a deal because the kids are still going to hear the bad words. And B, no one buys albums anymore, so it doesn't really matter.
Yeah, exactly.
with music streaming, the PMRC thing is useless. It's irrelevant. But back in 1985, when people were transitioning from LPs to CDs, it was. And there was a hearing before Congress over whether the federal government should force record labels to put warning stickers on albums. Of course, several musical artists, thought it was a blockage of free speech. And like I mentioned earlier, Dee Snider from Twisted Sister, John Denver, and Frank Zappa never were heard in the same sentence again, except for this time.
Yeah, and we'll get into this in a second, but be assured they were all on the same side. John Denver had a little bit of a milquetoast image, but man, he was a champion for the speech and artists' freedom. So yeah, this whole thing, basically, this was around the time again where you started to get artists that were pushing the envelope, and it was becoming more of a permissive culture as far as language. You got to remember George Carlin with his 7 dirty words. And I said stand-up comedians, and then folks like Frank Zappa, and you had the British metal acts, and some additional
and the dawning of Andrew Dice Clay.
Yeah, you kind of had that at the beginning, but more seriously, I mean, you got the context here. A couple years earlier, a couple of troubled teenagers or young adults in Las Vegas, Nevada, they decided to commit suicide with a shotgun, or in one case, one guy tried to do it and blew off 3/4 of his face and died like 3 months later. But they were listening to Stay in Class, I believe, by Judas Priest, which of course got Judas Priest sued. And so there was this feeling that the music was doing the harm. And so obviously Tipper Gore, Susan Baker, and some of these politicians seized on this. And just like it was in the mid-50s, it was the evils of rock and roll. And as Frank Sinatra once called them, the cretinous goons were coming back. I happened to do a lot of research on this earlier in my life, and so I know a lot about this issue. So about the PMRC, a couple of interesting things to note. One of their co-funders and backers was Mike Love of the Beach Boys. That's the second time we've mentioned him. One of rock's great assholes. That kind of proves it. They also had this ridiculous thing, and this kind of sets up the hearing. The hearing was in Congress in the Senate was on September 19th, 1985. Now let's get into the hearing, and this will be a little bit long, but I think this is worth talking about. It's just sort of ruminating on it. And this is the passion here is kind of extraordinary, but the backdrop is ridiculous. I mean, this became a total circus, and John Danforth, who was a senator from Missouri, is like, now let's not make this into a circus, folks. And then, of course, it degenerates. So now, in a surreal moment, and if you do a Google search, you can find this video. Senator Paula Hawkins of Florida, as part of entering evidence or whatever into this hearing, there's one of those old school, like kind of twisty dial, like 13-inch Zenith type TVs. She decides that Van Halen's "Hot for Teacher," that video, is the perfect example of something that's having an undue evil influence on children. Give me a break. If you remember the video, Waldo and a bunch of dancing women, but so what? So, I mean, that's just indicative of the kind of stuff that was going on. And you didn't really have artists in support of this. But then the artists came, and then, boy, did the fire come. So I'm going to read 3 excerpts from the star witnesses. Dee Snider of Twisted Sister, who came in, I think somebody told him, forgot to tell him, when you go to Congress, maybe you should dress up. Comes in his denim vest with the big hair and the aviator shades and the big dangly earrings and the whole thing. Okay.
Nice.
But then he sits down, and he actually is the most articulate and direct, lawyerly guy of the bunch. Tells him that he's a 30-year-old Christian that has a 3-year-old son, blah, 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 and this is not what he does. And then he goes through the specifics of how he was attacked. This one is jaw-dropping. So he says, there was accusation number 1, as he called it. This attack was contained in an article written by Tipper Gore, which was given the forum of a full page in my hometown newspaper on Long Island. In this article, Ms. Gore claimed that one of my songs, Under the Blade, had lyrics encouraging sadomasochism, bondage, and rape. The lyrics she quoted have absolutely nothing to do with these topics. On the contrary, the words in questions are about surgery and the fear that it instills in people. Furthermore, the reader of this article is led to believe that the 3 lines she quotes go together in the song when, as you can see from reading the lyrics, the first 2 lines she cites are an edited phrase from the second verse, and the third line is a misquote of a line from the chorus. That the writer could misquote me is curious, since we make it a point to print all of our lyrics on the inner sleeve of every album. As a creator of Under the Blade, I can categorically say that the only sadomasochism, bondage, and rape in this song is in the mind of Ms. Gore.
Nice.
So that's great, and it gets better. This is John Denver's take. This is a part of his testimony. I've had, in my experience, 2 encounters with this sort of censorship. My song, Rocky Mountain High, was banned from many radio stations as a drug-related song. This was obviously done by people who had never seen or been to the Rocky Mountains and had also never experienced the elation, the celebration of life, or the joy in living that one feels when he observes something as wondrous as the Perseids meteor shower on a moonless and cloudless night, when there are so many stars that you have a shadow from the starlight, and you're out camping with your friends, your best friends, and introducing them to one of nature's most spectacular light shows for the very first time.
And smoking pot.
Probably. Obviously, a clear case of misinterpretation. Mr. Chairman, what assurance have I that any national panel to review my music would make any better judgment? And then he also says this, which I thought was smart. To my knowledge, my movie, Oh God, was not banned in any theaters. However, some newspapers refused to print our advertisements, and some theaters refused to put the name of the film on the marquee. I don't believe we were using the name of the Lord, our Lord, in vain. Quite the opposite. We were making a small effort to spread his message that we are here for each other and not against each other. And now the main event, which was Frank Zappa, in his brilliant irreverence and wit, but also his passion outside of his music. This was probably his finest moment. I would love to read the whole thing, but you would probably turn us off if I did, because it would take too long. Anyway, here's part of it. The PMRC proposal is an ill-conceived piece of nonsense which fails to deliver any real benefits to children, infringes the civil liberties of people who are not children, and promises to keep the courts busy for years, dealing with the interpretational and enforcemental problems inherent in the proposal's design. It is my understanding that in law, First Amendment issues are decided with a preference for the least restrictive alternative. In this context, the PMRC's demands are the equivalent of treating dandruff by decapitation. No one has forced Mrs. Baker or Mrs. Gore to bring Prince or Sheena Easton into their homes. Thanks to the Constitution, they are free to buy other forms of music for their children. Apparently, they insist on purchasing the works of contemporary recording artists in order to support a personal illusion of aerobic sophistication. Ladies, please be advised. The $8.98 purchase price does not entitle you to a kiss on the foot from the composer or performer in exchange for a spin on the family Victrola. Taken as a whole, the complete list of PMRC demands reads like an instruction manual for some sinister kind of toilet training program to housebreak all composers and performers because of the lyrics of a few. Ladies, how dare you?
Yeah, he pretty much laid the smackdown there.
Yeah, and so it's interesting talking. So this is the finest moment, I guess, for the defense of rock when those three guys can come together. Now, obviously, the legacy of the PMRC is that, yes, the RIAA did introduce, those black and white decals that we used to see on the bottom right corner of CDs. That's the PMRC's fault. Culminated 5 years. It took until about like the Two Live Crew year. And my understanding is the first album to go number one with that sticker on it was Ifo Zagen by NWA, which is great because they intentionally made that record as filthy and as unlistenable as possible as a fuck you to George Bush. Moving on, we go from the serious polemics of rock and roll to just serious, awesome power pop rock and roll.
And this is number 4. And the number 4 moment we have here is Husker Due goes to a major label. Now, back in the late 80s, early 90s, indie bands crossed over to major labels all the time. And, there was always a lot of flack when certain bands did it. But in 1985, Husker Due were the first of the major American indie underground bands to actually go willingly to a major label. Husker Due, we've talked about them before on this podcast. Husker Due are one of the greatest. They're one of the big name underground alternative / indie American bands of the 1980s. Fuck that. They're one of the best American bands of the 80s, period. In my opinion. And one of the more influential too. Without them, there's no punk pop. Without them, they really laid the template for both Nirvana and Green Day, which is saying a lot.
Yeah.
But anyway, this band, Husker Du, they started out as a super badass hardcore speed punk band, and they later changed their sound to very melodic, almost poppy, but still aggressive pop punk. And in 1985, they released 2 albums. New Day Rising, which is a classic. That was their last album for the independent label SST, which is started and owned by Greg Ginn, the guitarist and leader of Black Flag. And they were the biggest selling band on the SST label. That being said, selling a lot of labels on SST really didn't mean much.
Yeah, pretty much.
You're still not selling that many records. However, they were a huge live draw. And they sold out every club they played in, whether it's every 500 to 1,000 capacity club they played in, they sold out, and they were known for their live shows too. In a lot of ways, they were kind of like the Who. They were like the hardcore punk version of the Who in a lot of ways. And anyway, they got sick of not selling records. So around the same time the Replacements crossed over to major label, Husker Du did as well. But with the Replacements, it was expected because the Replacements were basically a boogie woogie rock and roll band, in the underground circuit. Everyone knew that. With Husker Du, they were a genuine punk rock band. And when they crossed over, it really raised eyebrows. And it kind of started a wave of indie underground bands starting to, you know what, fuck this. I want to make money. Let's go to a major label. And they went there in 1985. So that's why it's an important part, because it kind of started the wave of indie, or planted the seeds for indie and underground bands. And you know what? Maybe it's not such a bad idea to go to a major label. If Husker Du can do it, we can do it.
Yep.
And this is kind of what started it all. The album that resulted in it, ironically enough, Flip Your Wig, is a really good record. Came out same year as New Day Rising came out. Nowhere near as good as New Day Rising. It's pretty clear the Flip Your Wig songs were like the leftovers. It sounds like they were the leftovers from New Day Rising.
Yeah,
still a good album, but
right. And I mean, to be fair, I mean, when you get on a major label at that time, because in a way, like you said, them and the Replacements are the standard bearers for the underground, and there was an incentive perhaps to play it a little safe.
Well, before you say standard bearers, they were the second level standard bearers. The number one standard bearers back then was REM.
Well, yeah, no shit. Yeah, REM. What I mean though is like some of these like real sort of DIY sort of club bands that were doing it for SST and some of those underground labels. Yeah, without REM, those guys don't get their push. That is clear.
Ironically enough, they got to the majors before REM did.
Yes, they did. And if I remember right, REM didn't get to the majors until Green, correct?
Yeah, it was when Document went big. After that, they jumped.
Gotcha. But yeah, without REM's success and without them kind of setting the roadmap for how to do it, the Replacements and Husker Du don't get there. So my whole thought is, yeah, I mean, you're right. The SST records by Husker Du are amazing. Flip Your Wig, not so much. And my thought is that maybe they were playing it safe because they wanted to make sure that they kept that status. It was a real risk. Even back then, you had to kind of show, it's like show me the money, and you had to prove that you were viable. So, like you said, it really did sort of carve the path. Husker Du and the Replacements were out first, and then the ball rolls downhill. You get the Sonic Youths and the Jane's Addictions, and and it all leads, the Pixies, and it all leads and it all culminates in that golden period there, 91 to 94. You get the Nirvanas and and bands like that, the Pearl Jams, and these folks that although to be fair, Pearl Jam started on a major label. Soundgarden's a better example. Screaming Trees, these bands that graduated there, in the Seattle bands basically, Mudhoney, and they all got their run on the major labels. Husker Du kind of made that possible. We've made the joke before. It's bears repeating because, again, it'll never not be true. Dave Grohl probably should give about 25% of his royalties to Pop Mold.
Fuck that, 75%. Everything Foo Fighters does sounds like a clean corporate radio version of what Husker Du did, but not as good. So, now, number 5 reason why September 1985 is so fascinating. Money for Nothing by Dire Straits from their huge album Brothers in Arms hits number 1 on the Billboard Hot 100. And this song is one of those songs that was number 1, but it was also a bit controversial because there's a lyric, where Mark Knopfler is singing that little faggot with the earring and the mink coat. Look at him get those girls. What people didn't understand is that Mark Knopfler was pulling a Randy Newman when he wrote that song.
Oh, I know.
I say pulling a Randy Newman means writing in character, writing from the perspective of the character that you're writing about. It does not mean you are that character. It means you're making an observation. It's probably a character that he knew, and he's writing from that person's perspective. It doesn't mean the writer has those same views. And a lot of people are stupid and don't fucking get that. That's what writing in character is all about.
Yeah.
I mean, for example, Hollywood screenwriters, when they have movies when you have movies take place in the 40s and 50s, and you have guys insulting black people, saying the N-word, it doesn't mean the script writer is a racist. He's writing for the character.
Yes.
That's what Mark Knopfler was doing here.
Yes.
Idiots.
Yes, and that gets into that's a different take on what I was going to say, in the sense that, to me, yes, Knopfler, the story is kind of famous that Knopfler claims that he was in a Sears or a Kmart or something, and he overheard these two guys that worked there that were kind of they were the guys that lugged in the stuff and set it all up and had to do the deliveries and like load the docks and all that, and he heard them bitching about guys like him that were up there doing the fabulous rock and roll things. So the idea is they're getting all the glory, and look at all these yahoos up there while we have to sit here busting our asses. And so I always wondered, he got a song out of that. What was he goofing on? Was it kind of goofing on himself? And so, let's get a celebration of just how ridiculous we are in these people's eyes. Was it satire, or was he kind of like the Coen brothers would do? Is it, you question, is it a lark? Are they really insulting these guys? Are they looking down on these guys and saying, okay, so this is kind of nothing? And so what we'll do is we'll get a celebration of this kind of idle bitching. I will say this. Can you name another number one song that used the word faggot? I can't.
There are probably some hip hop songs there that did.
No, actually, I don't even remember that. And if they did, they wouldn't get on the air. Yes, have there been, homophobia and misogyny and, this idea of sissy guys. That's, come on, like Pretty Fly for a White Guy is pretty much, that's kind of a sly gay joke too. But the thing here is, this is another one of those instances where we were just talking about with Money for Nothing. The people listening to the radio today, they wouldn't get the satire or they wouldn't get the joke, which gets, kind of meta. But they also, obviously you couldn't get away with that. And I understand, Prince, I'm sure, like these guys, I'm sure there were like millions of people that were saying that same thing about Prince, but you definitely couldn't get away with that today. A couple other things about this song. I love it. It's a perfect song to me. So catchy, so energetic, so possessive of that era's attitude and aesthetic. And again, it's so exemplary and such an earworm and so awesomely well done that, he gets away with some of that shit. To this day, like classic rock will still play that song. They don't bleep out faggot, which maybe they should at this point because of Hurt Feelings. I've never heard it bleeped out in all the years that it's been on. Why? Because again, it's basically a perfect pop song. And look, Knopfler, this is the Sultan of Swing that just, decides to just crank it up, and he finds that riff. And then remember, that song also gets very meta and it's clever. Sting sneaks in there.
Sting sings the I Want My MTV part.
Yes, which is very much a high concept meta joke, because if anybody was embodying the spirit of I Want My MTV at the time, it was Sting. And so a lot of this is kind of basically it's kind of self-effacing stuff that they're kind of doing this. They're kind of goofing on themselves. It's like, okay, so how do people think about guys like me that are up there rocking out? And just a random thing. God bless Mark Knopfler for rocking the pink headbands, because that's about as 80s as it gets.
On this episode, Chris and I did an overview of the strange, fascinating, and oddly resonant month of September 1985. One of the major events of that month was Michael Jackson purchasing the entire Beatles publishing catalog. Well, we have more Michael coming at you for our next episode, and more Prince as well. That can only mean Yes! The classic, award-winning, million-listener series returns. Prince versus Michael Jackson, Chapter 4, 1991 to 1999. Prince changes his name to a symbol, and we'll find out why. In addition, the insanely prolific genius becomes even more prolific, staying true to his vision even as his commercial success wanes. Michael Jackson is not immune from the changing times and changing tastes either. But was his music at this time really any good? Plus, his personal life becomes a circus sideshow worthy of tabloid headlines, and mostly to a detrimental effect to poor Michael. Listen in as the epic saga continues. Email us at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com or hit us on Twitter at curmudgeonpod. Okay, now we continue. We got 5 more points to go as to why September 1985 was such a unique, interesting time in the history of rock. And the next point, I guess, would be point number 6. And this involves everybody's favorite former hippie rock band from the 1960s. They were once called Jefferson Airplane. They changed their name in the 70s to Jefferson Starship. They got worse and worse and worse. And they reached the nadir of their or the peak, if you're a populist. And in September of 85, they unleash "We Built This City" on an unsuspecting world.
Yes, they did. And so, story here. Well, first off, I think it was took about 4 or 5 guys to actually write this song.
It took 4 people to write a song this bad.
No, exactly. And well, it depends on your perspective. So at this point, so Jefferson Starship around this time, and it wasn't this album. I think it was a little bit later on. I guess they embarrassed Jefferson so much that Jefferson took his name. Oh, that was a Paul Kantner thing. So Paul Kantner took the Jefferson with him. So they eventually just became Starship.
Yeah.
So they come out with this, and obviously they were searching for a hit, and they found this thing, and it's an earworm that we can't escape. To this day, you can still go into most grocery stores, maybe on a given Tuesday. You will hear "We Built This City." We don't have to really, we built this city. Your mom knows we built this city. Your grandmother, provided that she's still kicking, knows we built this city. Became this huge hit and is generally considered the worst song of all time by, rock aficionados, dare I say snobs like us, to the point of about 5 years ago, Rob Tannenbaum, who's a wonderful writer and reporter. I actually worked for him a few times as a freelancer. Good dude. He published an oral history of "We Built This City" in GQ. And so Jefferson Starship was badly in need of a hit at this point. They had gone for a while. And so there became this process where the producers get in touch with some song doctors. This thing gets passed around. And here we come up with "Built This City." Now, a lot of this I will base on Tannenbaum's article. So we're just quoting from this. Mickey Thomas, who was Jefferson Starship's lead singer after Marty Balin left the group, quoting from this, he says, "I joined Jefferson Starship in 1979, which was one of the pivotal points of reinventing the band. I wasn't exactly a Starship fan. I came out of soul music. There were always different members coming and going, so the band was constantly evolving. I shaved my mustache. We were, this counts as reinventing ourselves. So I wanted to reinvent my personal look as well. The music itself was a huge gamble." So this actually started off, Bernie Taupin was involved in this. Strange but true. Elton John's writer. He actually took the first stab at the lyrics. And so that is where it started. Went down the line. Bernie Taupin himself, he was saying that the original song was a very dark song about how club life in LA was being killed off and live acts had no place to go. So, of course, this was supposed to be a LA love song. And apparently, once it went from there, it kept getting worse and worse and worse. Grace Slick, at this point, for her sake, says, "I was such an asshole for a while. I was trying to make up for it by being sober, which I was all during the '80s, which is a bizarre decade to be sober in. So I was trying to make it."
Grace Slick has always been a great interview. She gives great interviews.
Oh yeah, she's very bright. And she says, "So I was trying to make up to the band by being a good girl. Here we're going to sing this song. We built the city on rock and roll. Oh, you're shitting me. That's the worst song ever." So even she thought the worst song ever. And then, of course, later on in this article, her bandmates were like, "Yeah, whatever." She was like totally on board because she wanted to make a shitload of money. So again, say what she wants now, but it treated her well. So, we get down the line and it gets out there. Now, everybody probably knows this song, and it actually was written by Bernie Taupin, which is Marconi Plays the Mamba. Which
Jesus.
is like, what the fuck does that mean? And that's in the chorus. Marconi was like, okay, so the idea is Marconi, I think, was like the first European composer whose music actually took hold in America. So
right.
Apparently Marconi built Los Angeles, which is fucking absurd. So you can talk about all of this, but point being is, so they released Knee Deep in the Hoopla, which obviously is a line from that song. And this song comes out. Maybe it was just supposed to be a kind of a kitschy thing to say, "Hey, look, Grace Slick lives," and it exploded and became like this huge hit. So it actually did end up on a Blender list of the worst songs of all time. Here's a quote from one of the band members. The number 3 song on that Blender list was "Everybody Have Fun Tonight" by Wang Chung.
Oh, I remember that song.
Yeah, which Peter Wolf produced. Peter Wolf, not that Peter Wolf, was the guy who produced the song. Yeah. I called him and said, "Dude, I'm on one of the worst songs ever, but you're on 2. That's awesome."
And speaking of turds, the next reason why in September of 1985 is so fascinating. And yes, unfortunately, we have to talk about her. Kate Bush releases Hounds of Love. Now, if you are a longtime Curmudgeon Rock Report listener, on our second or third episode, we went into albums about artists that are sacred cows that need to be put out to pasture. And one of them, for me, was Kate Bush, one of the most critically overrated artists or music artists who's ever come out of the UK. In a nutshell, I find her upper middle class classical music and ballet affectations really annoying and insulting. It's way too how do I say, is histrionic a word? Well, she definitely is solipsistic.
But I mean, it's not histrionic. It's definitely dramatic, but it's self-serious.
A little way too self-serious. And I've never liked her voice. I never much cared for her lyrics. I think her lyrics are just too much fairy tale, whisper in the wind shit. Yeah. Bullshit, I should say. Too much fairy tale nonsense. However, this month and this year is important because Hounds of Love is really her one good album. The one album where she actually decides to not be Kate Bush and do something musically interesting for a change. And she does. It's her one good album. And it's basically the album where her reputation is based on. And, this is the album where people started taking Kate Bush seriously. Yes. And I admit it's good. And after this album, she went back to sucking. So.
Yeah, pretty much. And again, this album, 3 words, British as fuck. For this period, it's got that production, it's got the echo, it's got the sort of the drum machiney kind of thing going on, which actually surprisingly goes pretty well with that. She was like,
Yeah.
if Tarzan was a woman, maybe he was Kate Bush. So you know what I mean?
Kate Bush probably did do a video like that where she was in a Tarzan outfit with some gorillas, knowing her.
Yeah,
She did all kind of wacky videos.
yeah, exactly. So yeah, she was an artiste, but look, there is actually some sweet stuff on this record. It's
there's some good stuff on this record.
There's songs about empowerment, and there's love. There's a wonderful lyric on this album, that stuck with me for years. Every time it rains, you're here in my head. That's again, depending on your perspective, I've always thought that was profound, because that's kind of, me, Artie. I'm a hopeless romantic, and I'm kind of corny when it comes down to it. So now we move from the self-serious Brits to clearly just a bunch of brats.
Yes, and we're talking about the movie St. Elmo's Fire, which contains a group of young actors at the time who all appeared in the same movies at the set together, and usually directed by John Hughes. For example, The Breakfast Club, Pretty in Pink, blah, blah, blah. However, St. Elmo's Fire, directed by Joel Schumacher. And most of what came out of this movie, even though it was successful in the box office, not a box office smash, but it was the song that came out of that, by Simple Minds, Don't You Forget About Me, which became a #1 hit in many countries, not just in the U.S. I think it went #1 in the U.K. too. I'm not exactly sure. I got to look it up. But It was a gigantic smash hit.
Yes.
And this song still echoes many decades later.
Yes.
How? I don't know. I don't even think it's that good of a song.
Yeah, it's like iconic / ironic, that it still shows up in commercials. It still hasn't died from some radio formats. You still hear it. Not necessarily on classic rock, but like top 40 radio sometimes will do sort of throwbacks, and that's one of them.
Yeah.
For what it's worth, by the way, it was a guy named John Parr that wrote and sung St. Elmo's Fire. And right. I can understand why you confuse them, because Simple Minds was Don't You Think About Me. Which is the other national anthem for the Brat Pack. I would argue that this is the primary one.
Yeah.
And the reason we're bringing this up is that this was September's other #1 hit on the Billboard charts. The first one was Money for Nothing by Dire Straits, or actually that was the second one. Right before that was John Parr's St. Elmo's Fire, which all I remember is it's a terribly awkward rumbling beat. It's got weird keyboards and this sort of triumphant horn keyboard thing, which really sounds like it belonged in Rocky IV, which has a wonderfully terrible but iconic soundtrack itself. And then you've got John Parr, who was basically a 2-hit wonder. The year before, he had a song called Naughty Naughty, which was all over MTV. And then he comes back and does St. Elmo's Fire. John Parr, the only memory I have of him, one, he has a voice that sounds like he was smoking 3 packs of cigarettes a day while eating 3 bags of Tostitos a day. It was raspy, and it was it was a growl. But he also had like possibly the best mullet. He out mulleted the country guys. It was wonderful. And so St. Elmo's Fire, it's worth bringing up because it is basically, when you think of that, it is the most associated song with the Brat Pack for good reason. St. Elmo's Fire, which is not a great movie. It's one of these, hey, we're a bunch of young adults trying to figure out how to find our asses with both hands. And they all live in a neighborhood in Chicago, all hang out in the same bars, and they all date each other. And look, they were all in it. Andrew McCarthy, Demi Moore, Judd Nelson, I believe, was in it. And
Emilio Estevez, was he in it?
I'm pretty sure he was. Basically, if you were a high-profile brat in Hollywood, chances are you were somewhere in that movie. It was basically the Super Friends of the Brat Pack movies. They all came together. It was a real shit bomb. Really, again, two legacies of the movie were this song, and it really is what it was kind of the first visibility afforded to Demi Moore. She was kind of the new kid on the block, so to speak, there, and then that's where she kind of took off. But yeah, we got to talk about Setting Elmo's Fire because again, 1985, 1984. John Hughes kind of defined the aesthetic with his movies, but then it took off, and the Brats eventually grew up, and then they all had their issues. Some of them had drug issues. Rob Lowe, God bless him, sex tapes. Hey, good boy, Rob, good boy. Other than that, got to give it some love, and it'll forever be an earworm that we just can't escape.
And that leads us from one earworm to, in my opinion, another earworm, from something that aspired to the serious but really kind of flopped to something that's an artist who's one of the most well-respected artists of all time in the rock pop genre. And this is Tom Waits. Now, where does Tom Waits come into this? We talked about Starship and St. Elmo's Fire and Simple Minds and all this crap. Where does Tom Waits fall in? I'll tell you where Tom Waits falls in. In September of 1985, he released the album Rain Dogs. Now, up until 1985, Waits was a well-respected singer-songwriter who had just entered into a weird phase in his career. Okay. Now, in the year 2021, Tom Waits is a living legend, an American treasure, and one of the greatest singer-songwriters of all time, and one of the most singular, unique musical stylists who ever lived. Revered by people from everyone, from Bob Dylan, who once said that Tom Waits is one of his heroes. When Dylan says you're one of his heroes, that's saying something.
Yeah, I was going to say, that's pretty good.
That's pretty good. Springsteen has shown his admiration. Neil Young likes Tom Waits. Everyone loves Tom Waits. Tom Waits is an icon. And the album he released in September 1985, Rain Dogs, was and is part of his Weirdo Berlin trilogy, along with 1983's Swordfish Trombone and 1987's Frank's Wild Years. But this is the album that stands out because it is his greatest work. This is his coup de grace. This is the masterpiece that Tom Waits this is the feather in his cap when he eventually gets inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, which is another one that it isn't, I don't think is and should be. This is the first album that comes to mind. This is the masterpiece. This is the album that merged the cocktail lounge piano lizard, beatnik lizard of the 70s, and what I prefer, the weirdo, avant-garde piano and weird drum weird rhythm tracks and weird arrangements.
Basically.
And yet beautiful songs and these beautiful melodies and weird but beautiful and these amazing lyrics. Rain Dogs brings it all together in a way that none of his albums afterward did. This is the one that came out in September 85.
Yeah, and this is his, I guess he had discovered the German composers, the Kurt Weils and the Bertolt Brechts. And
he did that before with Swordfish Trombone.
Right. Yeah. And again, this is that same period. And so, but he upped his game in Rain Dogs, and he's just really on. And so you get those ballads on there he's got that oddly weird kind of grumbly but beautiful voice that he could really get some mileage out of that. Big Black Mariah, which is just this rollicking song. And again, there's those arrangements where the bass and the drums don't necessarily know they're in the same song. And the sort of the off kilter, the instruments, like New Orleans dirges is a style that gets in there, and so it's like this jazz, almost like chamber music, kind of blues. I don't know what you would call it, but it's like you said.
I would call it a mongrel hybrid of blues and jazz with avant-garde rhythms and what would I call it? Lots of just original, like innovative percussion that you've never heard before.
Oh yeah, I mean, like I said, the drum stuff on this thing is incredible. And again, it's just Tom Waits just he had a mind, and his and it didn't work like yours, it didn't work like mine, it didn't work like anybody's. And
Yeah.
well, like I said, so started with Swordfish Trombones, reached its peak with Rain Dogs, and then Frank's Wild Years. Not quite as good, but honestly, I would put this album was one of the top 100 albums ever made. I think
Yeah.
it absolutely belongs up there because he kind of maintains the aesthetic while mixing up the songs, and so beautiful ballads, rockers, kind of almost like bebop, like what would you call it? Like kind of fast jazzy kind of stuff, like upright
Yeah.
bass and
Sure.
this other kinds of stuff. So it's just real variety, but he pulls it off.
The number 10 reason why 1985 in the month of September was such a unique, weird, interesting year. Michael Jackson comes back and does something naughty.
Yeah, pretty well. I mean, I don't know compared to how naughty he got. Maybe not. So, okay. So we've talked about there's a few kind of monumental like news stories or happenings, and it wasn't just about the music. So you had Farm Aid and the Parents Music Resource Center and all of these things. Well, one of the other important of these pivot moments happened to when Michael Jackson bought the Beatles publishing catalog for $47.5 million, which even back then was a shitload of money. Now, there's a story behind this. Now, Paul McCartney and Jackson, when Jackson was in his ambition phase in the 70s, became friendly, and they had this sort of on and off again, not partnership, but kind of kind of tipping their cap to one another. They did a couple of duets together in the 80s. In 79, Michael Jackson covered Wing's Girlfriend, which Michael Jackson's hand actually became a pretty good song. Holy shit. So they became chummy, and these are two of the more ambitious, savvy guys in the history of rock and roll. There's a reason that they both basically became billionaires because they're smart and they're ruthless. So I guess in a conversation, McCartney gives some advice to Michael and say, hey, the real money lies in publishing. If you want to make some money, if you own publishing rights and you build that as an investment, the returns will be maybe astronomical. So make sure you own your catalog and go out there and shop. Well, that would come back to haunt Paul because the Beatles publishing catalog came up for auction or was out there for sale from, I believe it was EMI. So there was competition for this. And lo and behold, Michael is at the peak of his economic powers after coming off a Thriller and selling 5 gazillion, bazillion, trazillion records and had the money. And hey, Michael beat Paul for his own catalog, the Beatles, like Lennon, McCartney, Harrison catalog. Again, at the time was worth $47.5 million. Now, this is one of the great artist power moves of all time, and really kind of sold the artist as the mover and shaker with business. Michael was an icon, brilliant dancer, brilliant singer, brilliant, writer of songs. Wasn't that prolific, but when he wrote them, boy, did he. But here he showed that the artists could have the power. In a way, you could say this paved the path for REM to negotiate, what was it, like a 5-album, $80 million deal.
And unfortunately for Warner Brothers, right after they signed that deal, they just started REM started to suck after that.
Yeah, and just stuff like that, and then or like Jay-Z, he ended up being able to buy his own catalog, and then found his way to running Def Jam. started Tidal, and he became a gazillionaire. And so it kind of started this aesthetic of artists controlling their own destiny. But not only that, but not having any qualms about fucking over other artists when it came to business. It was a competition, and Michael proved that. It was an admirable move in some ways. Maybe a dick move, but an admirable dick move. And fortunately for Michael, when Michael, he was one of these guys that was too crazy to have money because he spent it all, if not on his face, then on a whole bunch of gaudy shit. I mean, come on, he bought a mansion, Neverland, and built a fucking amusement park and a zoo on it. And so basically every time
he basically built a pedophile's amusement park.
Yeah, pretty much. But the whole point being is that because he spent so horrifically and ridiculously and ludicrously, if he did not have this catalog, I don't believe Michael ever filed for bankruptcy, but this is what kept him afloat. Yeah. And I think by the time he died, it was worth like $500 million. And it basically was what kept him afloat. And it was kind of like the collateral he had to keep his creditors at bay. So right. A brilliant move that ended up being defensive. Now, again, I say that as a pivot point because it, as a business move there, kind of defining Michael's legacy as just a nasty motherfucker. Well, now, those coins that you hear in the background tells you that we are now entering the vault. We do this every episode. Arturo and I have a deep locker at the bottom of the ocean that has probably a combined 2.5 million CDs and MP3s, if an MP3 is something you can put in a vault. And every episode we like to take something out of it, whether it's weird, sometimes maybe it's an oldie but goodie that y'all know that's worth revisiting. But be that as it may, we are here to drop some knowledge about some old stuff that we would love if you explored too. Arturo, what are you taking out of the vault this week?
I'm taking out of the vault a classic album by from the 1980s by the American punk, maybe post-punk kind of band, but nevertheless very underratedly influential, Mission of Burma, and their 1982 album Verses. And for those astute rock music fans out there, yes, the title of the classic Pearl Jam album from 1993 was named after Mission of Burma's album. I guess supposedly Eddie Vedder was a big Mission of Burma fan.
Doesn't surprise me.
Yeah. Now, the indie underground rock scene in the U.S. was really bursting at the seams with great bands back in the 1980s. You had bands like Husker Du, the Meat Puppets, the Minutemen, Black Flag, the Replacements, Sonic Youth. They were all breaking new sonic ground in the genre of rock, and they were paving the way for the alternative rock revolution of the next decade, which you and I, Chris, have an entire 10-part series that we will talk about longer way down the road in the future. Wink, wink, hint, hint to our listeners. Now, Mission of Burma are probably the most underrated of these bands then and now. And they are arguably one of the most underratedly influential of all these bands, oddly enough. Also underrated is the Boston music scene that they came from. Aerosmith, the Cars, Jonathan Richman and the Modern Lovers, the Pixies, the Lemonheads, Morphine, they all came out of there. But MOB, or Mission of Burma, were probably the most abrasive of them all and one of the most innovative. Now, describing their music is really a bit difficult because really no band sounded like them before they emerged. They've been described as post-punk, but they weren't really at all a doom and gloom band, nor did they ever venture into angular avant-garde funk. They've been described as post-hardcore, but Mission of Burma weren't anything like a hardcore punk band, even if they share the same bill with some of those bands when they went out on tour. What they really were, at least to this curmudgeon, they were progenitors of alternative rock, and they were a touchstone influence on the subgenre of emo
Yes.
that would emerge in the late 1990s, early 2000s. Their sound had the urgency of punk rock, the skillful complexity of prog rock, and the lyrical wit and intelligence of some of the best art rock bands. Their music was naughty, Knot, like a knot in naughty. It was intense, hard coiled, and hard boiled. And most importantly of all, they were startlingly original, especially when you compare them to their peers of their era. Now, for those of you enamored with Ian MacKaye and Fugazi, I got news for you. Mission of Burma is the band those guys sound most like.
Yep.
Fugazi didn't come up with that shit on their own. Mission of Burma were their number one touchstone influence. Actually, indeed, Minor Threat, Ian MacKaye's hardcore punk band way before Fugazi, they and Mission of Burma shared a few bills in the early 1980s, and
Wow.
I bet you $100 Ian MacKaye was watching Mission of Burma intently.
Yeah.
Absorbing that. Another band heavily influenced by at Mission of Burma, At the Drive-In.
Yes.
Probably the greatest emo band of them all, were incredibly indebted to Mission of Burma. Archers of Loaf, another band indebted to Mission of Burma. We know about Eddie Vedder and Pearl Jam's fandom of Mission of Burma, but also Dave Grohl of the Foo Fighters has name-checked them as an inspiration, which I really don't hear in the Foo Fighters music. But anyway, Mission of Burma were at least 10 years ahead of their time, maybe even 20 years ahead of their time.
Yeah,
I think that's really ahead.
Those guys were, incredible songwriters, and they just bashed out. It was like incredibly just hooky, badass songs that they just bashed. But
just original riffs and unique rhythms and song structures.
Oh, I know. And, they just were incredibly talented and influential. And, Our Beloved Built the Spill, you can say actually was another one that might have been influenced by them too.
True.
Because look, they could play, but they could also get that crunchy aesthetic. They had a lot to say. And they said it well. Like I said, verses, really good. Record, obviously, their most famous song is "That's When I Reach for My Revolver," which is, I don't think there's a song on here that isn't better than that. That's how good this record is. So, good pick for them. I haven't had a Mission of Burma phase in a while. But I did listen to this record this week, and thank you for shaking those trees loose in my head.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, let me explain how this album was done.
Go ahead.
This classic of the 80s. The trio of Roger Miller, guitar and vocals, Clint Conley, bass and vocals, and Peter Prescott, drums and vocals as well. They formed in 1979 when the short-lived punk band Moving Parts broke up the previous year. Now, Miller and Conley were in that band and decided to practice together, eventually recruiting Prescott to play drums after he left his old band, The Moles. Now, soon enough, their live shows were getting rave reviews from the local Boston music indie fanzine scene, right? And the press landed that kind of press landed them a deal with Boston indie label Ace of Hearts. Their first single was Academy Fight Song, and with Max Ernst as the B-side, released in 1980. The single was a huge success in the New England area. The single sold out quickly, and the band hit the road at a punishing pace, like many of those indie bands of the 80s did. Side note, REM frequently played Academy Fight Song during their 1989 Green World Tour. Hey, how about that?
Not a surprise.
In 1981, they put out an EP that I think you referenced, Chris, Signals, Calls, and Marches, which belongs on anyone's list of the greatest EPs of all time. It contains their most well-known song, like you mentioned, That's When I Reach for My Revolver, which has been covered by a bunch of people, including Moby, Graham Coxon from Blur, and Catherine Wheel. I'd love to hear a Catherine Wheel fucking shoegazer band doing this song. Anyway, this all brings us to 1982 and the release of their full-length debut, Versus. Now, for a band whose live sound was known for being tight, concise, loud, and unrelentingly aggressive, the album is actually quite expansive, and it's very eclectic with a wide variety of sounds and texture. It also has some of the best songs the band ever recorded. You have the intense anti-Christianity tirade, New Nails, sample lyric. The Roman Empire never died. They just changed its name to the Catholic Church. There's the intense riffarama of Fun World. You have the staccato polyrhythmic workout of OK No Way, which Husker Due would rip off a year later on their album, on their song From the Gut from their EP of '83. Hands down, it's one of the best albums in the 1980s and one of the true all-time classics of U.S. indie rock. Now, unfortunately, their records sold well in Boston and the greater New England area, and not anywhere else. They toured like true road warriors, but they never garnered an intense cult following the way peers like Black Flag or the Minutemen enjoyed. If they weren't headlining less than half full shows, they were opening for bands in front of indifferent audiences. It was really a sad story. Outside of New England, no one gave a fuck about Mission of Burma. For more info about Mission of Burma, check out Michael Ozerod's excellent book, Our Band Could Be Your Life, Scenes from the American Indie Underground, 1981 to 1991. He devotes a whole chapter to Mission of Burma.
Yeah.
Now, lack of even the most moderate of success on an indie level, combined with Roger Miller's increasing problem with tinnitus in his ear, led to their amicable breakup in 1983. They reunited in 2002 and became a working band again, touring and putting out 4 albums from 2004 through 2012. They disbanded for the second and final time last year. But, hey, we still have the records, right? 1 single, 1 EP, and 1 album. That's all you need to understand how great and important Mission of Burma were, with Versus being the feather in this much-ignored band's cap.
Now we go from a band that continues to be revered in some corners and is worth some conversation to one of the more interesting bands or stories, kind of a lost band, if you will, Savoy Brown. And I'll be talking about the album Street Corner Talking from 1971. Bob Seger once proffered that rock and roll never forgets. Now, that might be true that rock and roll never forgets, but people forget, and generations forget, and radio programmers forget. And so Savoy Brown was a big deal in the late 60s and early 70s. They were one of the early, not a founder, but one of the early successes or breakouts of classic rock as we know it.
Yeah.
Basically, when you hear this record, you're like, oh, I've heard a lot of stuff that sounds just like this. I mean, this is derivative. No, it's not. Everybody was derivative of Savoy Brown. So just to give a little bit of background. So there's a famous scene. Most people know it from London in the late 60s, where all these white bands became enamored of black blues from America. And so you had this decidedly kind of, I don't know if you would call it psychedelic or sort of electrified, edgy take on those blues by all these bands. You know, you had the Yardbirds and Cream and Fleetwood Mac. Most famously, you had Jethro Tull, which I guess you could kind of include in this. And then you had Savoy Brown. Savoy Brown was led by a guy named Kim Simmons, who I think is on a par as a guitarist with any of those other guys. Maybe slightly below Clapton because he didn't have that kind of tone or audacity, but very good, virtuosic player, and really kind of he had a mind to him. He was adventurous. The early Savoy Brown records are very orthodox and very reverent of American blues. So lots of covers, and even a lot of the original songs are sort of slower and slinkier. And then ditties about drugs and love and kind of interesting but quirky stuff. As they went along, they started to get a little more ambitious. One thing to note, and a big part of the story of Savoy Brown, like a lot of these bands, Jethro Tull being one of them, there is a long and illustrious history of band leaders who are mercurial and or are a pain in the ass or are perfectionist, and they have this tendency to trade in the entire band. That is basically the entire story of Savoy Brown, which is still around. Kim Simmons is still doing his thing, but it's like always Kim Simmons and three other guys who then they get tired of him and then they leave, or he fires them. And so before this Record Street Corner talking, he had been working with a few guys, and they were fired, and they all went on to form Foghat. So Foghat is essentially Kim Simmons' fault. And so when we say that...
Hey, Foghat had one good song.
Yes.
Slow Ride.
Yes.
Take it easy. That's a good song.
Yeah, and made better by the fact that it is one of the use of it in Dazed and Confused is the best use of any song on that record.
Right.
So, okay, so he trades in Foghat, and then he brings in a few other guys, including... he had piano player Paul Raymond. He had the bassist Andy Sylvester, drummer Dave Bidwell. He got them all from this other band called Chicken Shack, which is kind of a competing band from that scene. And then
can I say something about Chicken Shack?
Sure.
Chicken Shack featured keyboardist Christine McVie.
Why, yes. And which is interesting because the other person that Simmons hired was new singer Dave Walker, who eventually joined Fleetwood Mac in that period, basically between Bob Welch and Lindsey Buckingham. Dave Walker was in Fleetwood Mac for a while. So brings these guys in, and then Simmons at this point is like, you know what? I want to rev it up. I want to get a little bit more adventurous. And so he kind of did a jump boogie, more exciting, more groovy version of what he had been doing. And the result is this album, Street Corner Talking, which I think is a near masterpiece. It's been lost. It did have a huge hit back in 1971. Again, like one of these forgotten hits called Tell Mama. Yeah, which is just a really great, groovy song. The secret weapon of this lineup was Sylvester, a tremendous bassist, great pocket. There's a groove all through this record, fast songs, slow songs, cover of Willie Dixon's Wang Dang Doodle that goes on for 7 minutes. So you've got two extremes. You've got Tell Mama, which is this great radio-ready rocker, just jump, energy in your face. Awesome soloing by Simmons. It is, look, I think you can make the argument that, or there's maybe a back and forth. Who invented classic rock? Was it Deep Purple or was it Savoy Brown? Because they're kind of the earliest folks that were doing this kind of thing. This sort of hooky, vibrant, kind of up-tempo thing, 71. Which was sprinkled with some keyboard and some organs and all of that kind of thing. So you've got Tell Mama at one extreme, and then on the other extreme, you've got the song All I Can Do, which is another amazing song, co-written with Paul Raymond. It features, I think, Dave Walker's best vocal on the record. And again, this is an 11-minute song, never loses its groove, in and out soloing by Simmons, who again was just a masterful guy and a masterful guitarist. And so again, it's a 7-song record. In later years, they tacked on a shorter version of Tell Mama, sort of radio-friendly version. And so at the time was a hit. They were a staple of early AOR, very early AOR rock. Well, what happened? So about starting in the early 70s, the more theatrical stuff came in, the more metallic stuff came in. And here you have these kind of stuffy, sort of muso, snobby guys. Famous story that Kim Simmons himself told me, that Kiss opened for them, Savoy Brown, on their first tour. Now, Kiss goes out there, puts on this fucking awesome show, the Demons. I don't know if they were using pyro at the time, but come on. Kiss is Kiss. Even if they sucked and they couldn't really, they couldn't stay in tune and they couldn't sing into the mic, they were Kiss. And so Savoy Brown, who are these not really charismatic guys, have to follow them. Whoop, didn't work. So, but before that, the next record, they did Hellbound Train. At this point, Simmons has been grinding for, 10 years. He's getting fatigued. He's also developing problems with alcohol and drugs. The quality falls off from Hellbound Train. I think that the programmers, everybody realized that. And after that, they fell off the face of the earth, although not really. Simmons kept working. Here's where it gets weird and where it kind of becomes personal for me. In his travels, he's going around there. He ends up in Ithaca. I mean, who knows? Maybe at the time he was couch surfing. He was in the depths of his misery. But he meets the woman that saves him. He cleans up. He marries her. They live in Ithaca for a long time. He's still doing Savoy Brown and doing touring where he can and all of that. And then they end up in all places in Oswego, New York, which is an hour north of my hometown of Syracuse. Did you ever make it up to Oswego when we were there, Arturo?
I may have once or twice, but I forgot.
Oh, it's godforsaken. It's got the most bars per capita of any city in America.
A lot of alcoholism there, I imagine.
Yes, a good reason, because they actually get, it's colder, windier, and they might not get as much snow accumulated as Syracuse, but man, when the snow hits up there, boy, does it hit. They get like 4 feet at a time. It's a miserable place. And so once upon a time in my old life, I actually interviewed Mr. Simmons on his property. It was kind of a farm up there in Oswego. And again, he's still, it was classic, sort of old school, like British rocker, blues rocker from the late 60s. Austin Powers come to life, the tinted glasses and the bad teeth and all that. And he took me out to his barn where he had all the guitars and the pictures with Muddy Waters and, his sort of shrine to himself. I think he kind of insinuated at the time that maybe he invented classic rock with this album. But it may be true. Again, the kind of the rhythmic stuff is there. One thing I will mention, and the only stain on this album, is they do a cover of "I Can't Get Next to You" by Whitfield and Strong. The only issue is it's a copycat cover done exactly the same way as Al Green did it in the same year.
Yeah, that sucks.
So the idea is, basically just replace Willie and Al's horns with Kim Simmons' guitar, but it's the same thing. Paul Walker doing a bad impression of Al Green in his phrasing, and the same kind of harmony vocals and all of that. But again, the saving grace is Kim Simmons. Again, I really admire the guy. I also think he's one of the best players in that era. And so if you want to discover a very lost classic,
yes,
Savoy Brown Street Corner Talking. It's on the streaming sites. You can even YouTube it. Especially check out Tell Mama. Awesome song. Just a very sort of orthodox single. Blueprint classic rock song. And then All I Can Do, and then the cover of Wang Dang Doodle. These guys and this particular Savoy Brown lineup was awesome. So we now exit the vault, and we have come to the end of another voyage of the Curmudgeon Rock Report, and a nice kind of fun, all over the place there version of September 1985. This is what we do. Oh, what a month, and who knows, there may be other oh, what a months coming up in the future of the Curmudgeon Rock Report. As always, you can hit us up at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com. You can. We're on Twitter at curmudgeonpod.com, and coming very soon. So something we're still working on is setting up a private Facebook group. This is very exciting. We want a curmudgeonly community, and all of you are in it. You are the iconoclasts. You are the leftover college rebels and punks, and everybody else thought you were losers, but we were all winners in our own circle. Why? Because we had rock and roll as the soundtrack. This is your podcast. We are your tour guides. We're here for you.
So let's leave our curmudgeonly community with one final September 1985 nugget. Super Mario Brothers debuted. Remember the game's music? Of course you do. Personally, it still haunts my dreams. But that music did open the floodgates to a torrent of brilliant compositions rendered in 8 bits. The Nintendo music that followed Super Mario just rocks. Personal faves include Ninja Gaiden and Metroid. Anyway, that's all for this week, folks. Hit us up at curmudgeonrock@gmail.com and interact with us on Twitter. Remember, this is your